America's worst terrorist attack since 9/11. The last of 49 bodies has been recovered from the scene of the mass shootings here in Orlando. The moment a party turned into an atrocity. The images shot by one of the victims. As some families wait to hear about their loved ones, the survivors describe the horror.
All the music, everything just stops. Everything stops. And all you hear is this loud noise like pa, 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 like one after another.
The US-born gunman pledged allegiance to so-called Islamic State. The rival candidates for the presidency offer radically different solutions.
I will suspend immigration from areas of the world where there is a proven history of terrorism against the United States.
If the FBI is watching you for suspected terrorist links, you shouldn't be able to just go buy a gun with no questions asked.
Meanwhile, thousands attend a vigil in London's Soho tonight as the Orlando victims are remembered around the world.
Also on tonight's programme, Gordon Brown weighs into the referendum debate to try to rally Labour support to remain in the EU. Violence at Euro 2016, 5 England fans are jailed. The England manager pleads for fans to stay out of trouble. And would you like to connect on LinkedIn? Microsoft would, and pays £18 billion to buy the company.
In the South, the lesbian and gay community gather in the South in memory of the victims of the deadliest mass shooting in US history. And a bridge over troubled water. Will the River Thames get a third bridge near Reading?
Good evening from Orlando in Florida, where tonight a clearer picture is beginning to emerge of America's worst mass shooting in its recent history. 49 people died in the nightclub just down the road behind me there. There's still a heavy police presence, and we're also getting a better sense of the police operation that was put on in order to save as many lives as possible, to end the carnage. We understand now that the killer, Omar Mateen, was cornered in a bathroom in the nightclub, and dozens of people were able to then escape after a hail of gunfire. But it was only because a SWAT team drove an armored vehicle through one side of the club's wall in order to get in to save as many lives as possible. Well, tonight, President Obama said that this was an act of homegrown terrorism and that there was no evidence that it was directed from elsewhere. Well, the attack happened in the center of Orlando at the Pulse nightclub. Here's our North America editor, John Sopel, with the latest on the shootings.
At a former school turned old people's home, the victims' families gathered. They came in their 2s and 3s, clinging to each other, bracing themselves for the worst possible news from the authorities. The process of identifying the bodies goes on, and for the families, an unbearable weight. Meanwhile, survivors have been telling their stories.
Hear what sounds like fireworks or balloons popping, and you assume it's part of the show. And then when you hear people start screaming and the sound doesn't stop.
It was rapid fire. It's like brrr, and then he'd like change, put another ammunition, brrr, and then change, put another ammunition, and I could just smell the ammo in the air, and I was like, this is a gun, this isn't fireworks, like we need to leave.
Meanwhile, new video has emerged from inside the club. It's just after 2 in the morning, and 25-year-old Amanda Alvear was filming on her smartphone as the first shots rang out. She would die in the barrage. These are pictures of some of the other young people who've been identified as having lost their lives. This is Eddie Justice. He was texting his mother as he was trapped in the bathroom of the club. Christopher Leinenen was one of those unaccounted for. His mother spoke as she waited for news.
When he was in high school, he started the Gay Straight Alliance. I've been so proud of him for that. Please, let's all just get along. We're on this earth for such a short time.
Today she found out that Christopher and his boyfriend did not survive. It's unclear how the gunman entered. The club was packed. The main dance floor was hit first. On the patio area, the gunfire was heard over the loud music. Some managed to escape through the fence, even those badly injured. Others hid in the toilets, calling police and texting friends and family for help. This morning I met Ivory McNeil. He was one of those who hid on the patio. He has an English husband, Jack, who was in Nottinghamshire at the time, and they were texting anxiously.
They're still shooting at us. What do you mean? We ran again.
All the music, everything just stops. Everything stops. And all you hear is this loud noise, like pa, 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 like one after another, like and it just doesn't stop. It doesn't stop, like it just keeps going. And so I run out to an enclosed patio that was in the back.
How did you manage to get out?
I hear like people coming in, so I kind of poke my head out and I see like this SWAT team of people. And like, so I come out, like I'm excited to see them, and I put my hands up. They're all like holding up guns, like they want to shoot me, but I'm like, hey, I'm not a part of this. Like, please, like help me, you know? And so I guess after a second, they realize that I'm not a part of it. And so they kind of like grab me and get me to safety. And we're just like walking low and like getting to safety.
And what about your friends? Did everyone get out?
People from the party died. People from the housewarming party died. People from the housewarming party were shot. My friends were shot.
And as we're packing up to go, he gets news that another of his friends has died. The siege was brought to an end by police punching a hole through the nightclub wall using explosives and an armoured vehicle as a battering ram.
There was a hole in the wall about 2 feet off the ground and about 2 or 3 feet wide. We were able to rescue dozens and dozens of people that came out of that hole. The suspect came out of that hole himself, armed with a handgun and a long gun, engaged in a gun battle with officers where he was ultimately killed.
So what of the killer Omar Mateen? Today Barack Obama said that it seems he was acting alone.
At this stage, we see no clear evidence that he was directed externally. It does appear that at the last minute, he announced allegiance to ISIL, but there is no evidence so far that he was in fact directed.
In Georgia, a gay men's choir sang, and vigils have been held across the country.
And it's scary that there are people in this world that see sexuality, color, economic standing as means to divide each other and to say this person isn't like me and their life isn't worthy or isn't worth anything.
The pain in the gay community is acute, and America's sense of insecurity and vulnerability has intensified still further. John Sokol, BBC News, Orlando.
And tonight we're getting a clearer picture of the man behind all this, Omar Mateen. He was 29 and he was already on the FBI's radar, but detectives and agents couldn't establish any clear links to terror. Today, Mateen's father said if he knew what his son was up to, he would have told the police. Well, our correspondent Ali Maqbool has been to Fort Pierce in Florida, where Mateen grew up, and he sent us this report on the killer and his possible motives.
As more families are told their loved ones died in the attack, new details are emerging about the man who killed them, Omar Mateen, whose father saw him just hours before the bloodshed began.
My son, what he did was totally wrong. Even though he's my son, I have to admit this is a terrorist act. I mean, this is terrorizing the whole people, and I don't forgive him.
Daniel Gilroy worked alongside him for about a year as a security guard. He says Mateen ranted about gay people, black people, Jews and women.
The anger and rage that he had towards people was amazing. It was like frustration. He hated people and he didn't like life. And he blamed all his problems on these classes of people.
Do you feel confident that you did everything you could?
No. I feel responsible or guilty.
During the night, security agencies searched Omar Mateen's home. While he was still carrying out his murderous attack, he called police to pledge allegiance to so-called Islamic State. The FBI says it's still looking into whether he had any help. But Omar Mateen's ex-wife said she'd feared for her own life.
And I saw that he was bipolar and he would get mad out of nowhere. That's when I started worrying about my safety, and then after a few months he started abusing me physically very often, and not allowing me to speak to my family, keeping me hostage from them.
Well, Omar Mateen lived here. His father says he didn't see this coming, but his son was investigated by the FBI twice. Once because of suspected associations with a suicide bomber, and once because people he worked with were alarmed with his rhetoric. Both times the FBI dropped those investigations.
So was your son getting any help from mental health problems?
I didn't see no sign of.
No sign.
No sign. He was at working. He was on time. He didn't mess. He didn't do nothing. As far as violence goes, his wife was happy. The kids was happy.
There are many under the spotlight, but ultimately it was one man with two weapons and a twisted outlook on life that plunged so many families into despair. Aleem Maqbool, BBC News in Fort Pierce, Florida.
Well, as we've heard, President Obama says this was an example of homegrown extremism, and he also said renewing his call for tougher gun controls. Our correspondent Nick Bryant reports now from Washington on America's reaction and the political aftermath of the shootings.
They sang the national anthem outside the White House last night. But in modern-day America, traumatic events like the massacre in Orlando tend to expose the country's divisions as much as bringing it together. That's especially so in election season, when the fight to occupy this building has become so bitter and so angry. Declaring that political correctness was crippling America, Donald Trump complained the immigration system is broken and redoubled his demand for a ban on Muslims entering the country.
When I'm elected, I will suspend immigration from areas of the world where there is a proven history of terrorism against the United States, Europe, or our allies, until we fully understand how to end these threats.
Hillary Clinton said identifying lone wolves should be a top national priority, and she called for new gun controls, preventing those on terror watch lists from buying the weapons of war.
If the FBI is watching you for suspected terrorist links, you shouldn't be able to just go buy a gun with no questions asked.
As the political debate raged, the quiet, practical work at this mosque in Virginia of persuading young Muslims against following a violent path. Unlike Britain, America has no national counter-radicalization program. Community leaders who've launched their own initiatives are calling for a more comprehensive approach.
We are all sharing in this challenge together, and the government as well as the communities need to partner together to counter radicalization of all types, because there is a common thread of mental health, social issues, political issues, psychological issues that need to be addressed in a comprehensive manner.
In this American tragedy, various national fault lines collide. The perennial question of gun control, gay rights, immigration, how to protect America, and how to preserve American values. Orlando has become the bloody backdrop for an ever more divisive battle for the White House.
And today that battle highlighted the stark and dramatic differences between the candidates, both in policy and in personality. Donald Trump focusing so much on immigration, Hillary Clinton devoting her speech, a lot of it, to gun control, two of the most polarizing issues in American politics. She believes that he does not have the temperament or foreign policy experience to be president. He believes you need a strong man in the White House and that she's too weak.
Well, vigils have been held around the world for the 49 people who died here. In Soho, in the heart of London, in the capital of the gay scene there, people left bars, they left restaurants, they filed into the streets and they held a minute's silence, and then they burst into spontaneous applause. Many were actually holding the rainbow flag, which is a symbol of the LGBT community, showing their solidarity with the targets of those killings here in Florida. Well, with me now is our North America editor, John Sobel. John, one wonders what effect all this may have on US policy.
Well, Clive, I suppose on a micro level, you'll see a tightening of security at airports, at railway stations. America feels very insecure after this attack and the San Bernardino attack, and before that, the Boston bombing. There's a recognition that there's a problem and people would deal with that. But on the bigger, more macro questions like gun control, I don't see any possibility of any sudden change there. On immigration, we heard Donald Trump talking about it. But would that have stopped a homegrown lone wolf killer like we've seen in this particular attack at the... It seemed also forward. It seemed like it was an Islamist attack. But what happens when you've got someone who is an Islamist, a homophobe, with mental health issues, in a society where there is easy access to guns? There's no easy solution to that.
Indeed, John. Many thanks for that. The roads remain sealed off around here. Heavy police presence. That is still an active crime scene. And you wander around the streets talking to people here. There is a sense of shock and people are stunned by what happened. But as you just heard John say, will anything change? That is well and truly up in the air. With that, Fiona, it's back to you.
Clive, thanks very much. And apologies for the breakup in the picture there. Let's take a look at some of the other day's news. The former Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, has weighed into the referendum debate, saying Labour voters have the most to gain if Britain remains in the European Union. He claims Britain can lead in Europe and boost jobs and improve workers' rights. It's part of an attempt to strengthen the case for remaining in the EU amid Labour fears that many of its core supporters back the Leave campaign. Here's our political editor, Laura Koonsberg.
Clearing the stage. The campaign to persuade you to vote in wants Tories out of the way, at least today. In place, the man who never quite convinced the public as Prime Minister.
Some of you, I gather, were expecting David Cameron to be here.
Can he persuade them now?
You cannot succeed in securing financial stability or dealing with pollution. The European Union is not the cause of the problem. The European Union can be part of the solution.
With the Tories divided, it's what almost every Labour MP would say are good reasons to stay.
What sort of message would we send to the world on June the 23rd if we, Britain, decided to walk away from our nearest neighbours? This is not the Britain I know. This is not the Britain I believe in. This is not the Britain we should aspire to be. We should be a leader in Europe and not leaving it.
It was meant to be David Cameron up there this afternoon. Instead, it's the former Prime Minister, Gordon Brown. And that tells you everything you need to know. The Remain camp is worried, deeply worried, that their weeks of warnings have fallen on deaf ears as far as Labour voters are concerned. So this week, different faces, different voices, and a different message.
But what about immigration that troubles so many?
Many Labour voters do feel simply, when you were in power, too many people came here from other parts of Europe, and that's why they think you lost touch, and that's why many of them might vote to leave.
What I say to people is you've got to get the balance right, and we manage immigration, we manage it. In the main, the immigrants who've come to our country are making a good contribution to our economy, but what we've got to make sure is areas under pressure have public services properly provided for.
Do you think you can make a difference in this vote?
I'm not claiming that I've got any ability to make a huge difference on my own. Together, we can show that we can get things done.
The occasional Labour MP is enjoying being on the other side, sharing the trail with Boris Johnson. And with new predictions today that immigration will go up and up for decades, outers claimed Gordon Brown's appearance shows they might win.
I can tell that the other side, the Remain side, are a little bit rattled, my friends, because they had a relaunch this morning. Did you notice they had a relaunch and they decided to use Gordon Brown to inject some dynamism into proceedings, which shows a measure of the panic that they're in. They are resorting to more and more scare stories, more and more misery, more and more discussion of the end of civilization as we know it. Do we believe this doom-mongering, folks? Do we believe that? Absolutely. Absolutely not.
All David Cameron's warnings seem not enough, so you'll see more of him.
We have 10 days left to proclaim the values of cooperation with our neighbours.
And more of them. This was not Remain's plan. Laura Kunzberg, BBC News, Leicester.
A study by a group that campaigns for lower immigration has forecast that if Britain votes to remain in the EU, net migration will total more than 250,000 a year for at least 20 years. The report by Migration Watch says there's widespread denial about the impact of rapid population growth. The Leave campaign says it's impossible to predict migration figures so far ahead. Here's our chief correspondent, Gavin Hewitt.
Migration, numbers, forecasts continue to be at the heart of this referendum campaign. Today, Migration Watch, a research group campaigning for lower immigration, has attempted to answer the question.
What do the next 20 years look like? Migration is currently running at 330,000 people a year. 184,000 of that number come from the EU. Migration Watch forecasts net migration will exceed 250,000 for the next 20 years, with 60% coming from the EU. The group says it has examined current figures and compared a low scenario with a high one. They looked at a variety of factors, including salary levels between countries and how they might act as a pull factor. The report says there is complacency about the impact of rapid population growth, which it says could change the UK forever. It argues that the figures would raise the UK population to nearly 80 million within 20 years.
We've done this before and we've got it right before. Of course, there are uncertainties, but if we're going to have those sort of increases, frankly, we've got to think about the houses that we're going to need, the GPs that we're going to need, the school places. These are all hugely relevant to an increasing population.
But this projection is based on no new country joining the EU, and other forecasts have shown lower increases. Migration Watch says that if Turkey joined the EU in 2024, then net migration could be as high as 420,000 people a year by 2035. The government and the Remain camp, however, insist there is no chance of Turkey joining the EU in the foreseeable future. Others point out how difficult it is making forecasts.
I think we need to take these predictions with a major pinch of salt. I think they are not particularly reliable because they give very specific numbers to things that we just can't estimate, because we're talking so many years in the future, and we don't know what kind of shock events might take place in the next 10 to 20 years.
Immigration remains a central battleground. Only by leaving the EU can you control it, say the Leave campaign. Risking the economy is not an answer to immigration, says Remain. Gavin Hewitt, BBC News.
The President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, has said that a UK vote to leave the EU could cause the destruction of Western political civilization. We can talk to our Europe editor, Katja Adler, who's in the Austrian capital, Vienna. Katja, he couldn't have put it in any stronger terms. What does he mean?
Well, it's definitely a pretty apocalyptic-sounding statement that Britain leaving the EU could lead to the destruction not just of the EU itself, but, as you say, of Western political civilization. Now, David Cameron has steered clear of these comments, while those who accuse the Remain campaign on focusing on Project Fear have made a lot of them. But Donald Tusk, he's the man who represents EU leaders in Brussels. He's no EU federalist or EU idealist. Those politicians, he says, are out of touch with the people of Europe. But what he is a former Polish Prime Minister. And Eastern Europe and much of NATO worry that a weakened EU post-Brexit could be less tough on sanctions against Russia, emboldening President Putin. Donald Tusk says that a Brexit would lead to anti-Europeans opening a champagne bottle. A referendum, he says, is a big gamble, and an EU-UK divorce would be lengthy, traumatic and costly, he says, particularly for Britain. Now, EU leaders really aren't sure how effective their words are on British voters. And just tonight, we have heard that the Sun newspaper is calling for a leave vote.
Katja Adler in Vienna, thank you. Well, with the referendum just 10 days away, we're taking stock of the key themes of the campaign this week, looking at business, immigration, security, sovereignty, and tonight, the economy. On the day that both bosses and union leaders at one of the UK's biggest companies, BT, wrote to 80,000 staff to say they support remaining in the EU, our economics editor Kamal Ahmed examines the economic issues on both sides of the referendum debate.
The economy. Polls tell us it will influence the way we vote on June the 23rd. Ultimately, many people believe this decision is based upon what is best for the health of the UK economy, what is best for businesses to flourish, what is best for jobs, for people's income, for the national wealth. When it comes to the referendum, this is certainly a big issue.
This is the Airbus factory in North Wales, where they build wings for planes. They support remaining in the EU. It's about investment, so important for Britain. Other firms do disagree, and it shows how economic debate can divide.
Unlike this precision engineering, economics is not an absolutely precise science. A lot of it is based on judgment. Yes, there are models to test those judgments, but the facts can be disputed. And why is that? Because this is about the future, and the future, of course, is uncertain.
That doesn't mean the opinions of economists should be thrown on the scrap heap. Models can be important signposts to what could happen.
A lot of major organisations have given their judgment on what could happen if Britain were to leave the European Union. In report after report, organisations like the Bank of England, like the International Monetary Fund, have warned that there could be a short-term economic shock, even a recession. Now, on the other side, far fewer economists are arguing that the economy could grow. Now, just because they are fewer doesn't mean they're wrong, just that their models are different. But what is clear is that the economic consensus is on one side of this debate.
The Remain camp insist leaving would be a risky manoeuvre. The big issue is uncertainty over what our relationship would be with the rest of the EU, causing stock markets to fall and companies to delay investment. Trade could be adversely affected by leaving the EU's single market, and the EU is our single biggest destination for exports, which creates jobs and national income. And sterling has already been under pressure, and its value is likely to fall on Brexit, helping exports, but meaning it would be pricier to travel abroad and imports would be more expensive. Some in the Leave campaign agree there could be a short-term impact, but insist there is another way to look at the economic debate.
Supporters of Britain leaving the EU say that over the longer term, the economy would actually strengthen. They say that Britain would be able to sign free trade deals with countries like America and China without the need for complicated agreements with 27 other EU countries. They say there would be less red tape because Britain would no longer have to abide by those EU regulations, and imports would be cheaper. Why? Because Britain would no longer have to impose the EU tariffs that are put on imports from outside the European Union.
The economy is at the centre of this debate, and weighty experts say there would be a negative impact, in the short term at least, if Britain left the EU. For the Leave campaign, warnings of gloom are just playing to people's fears. They argue that over the longer term, far harder to judge admittedly, the UK economy could take off to a brighter future. Kamal Ahmed, BBC News.
Football now, and 5 England fans have been jailed in Marseille following the violence during the opening stages of Euro 2016. But a French official has described some of the Russians involved in the fighting as hyper-violent. The England manager, Roy Hodgson, and captain Wayne Rooney have appealed to fans to stay out of trouble. Here's our sports editor, Dan Roan, and his report contains some flashing images.
They're the scenes that shamed football and could see England kicked out of Euro 2016 in disgrace. The team has been trying to focus on their next game, but with the threat of expulsion from the tournament hanging over them, today coach and captain had this message for the supporters.
I'd like to ask the fans, please, if you don't have a ticket, don't travel. And for the fans with tickets, be safe, be sensible, and continue with your great support for the players.
I'm obviously very concerned about the threat which is now hanging over us and the sanctions that could possibly be imposed upon the England team. We worked very hard to get here, and we really desperately want to stay in the competition. And I'm appealing, therefore, to all of our fans, and we appreciate your support at the matches, of course, but I'm appealing to you to stay out of trouble.
UEFA's warned England and Russia they'll both be thrown out of the tournament if there's any repeat of the scenes in Marseille. The French authorities say a hardcore group of Russian thugs were largely responsible. None have been arrested.
There are 100, 150 people who have a reputation inside Russia of being hooligans. They're very well trained, they're very fast, and it's difficult to identify them. They came here to fight and were very quick and very violent.
Today, a French court jailed 6 England fans for their involvement in the clashes. 20-year-old Alexander Booth sentenced to 2 months for throwing a bottle at police and banned from France for 2 years. His father gave this reaction.
Absolute disgrace. Making scapegoats out of poor kids like Alex. Find the real thugs. Excuse me.
The weekend's violence has cast a shadow over a tournament that's only just begun. The trouble raising serious questions about the effectiveness of the policing, the segregation of fans and stewarding inside the stadium, and UEFA's scheduling of certain matches deemed high risk. England came close to being kicked out of Euro 2000 after fans went on the rampage in Charleroi, but some believe they're now at even greater risk. David Davies was the FA's executive director at the time.
In my view, a team has never been as close as it is today to being thrown out of a major football tournament. UEFA are under huge pressure because of the threat of terrorism, which has only grown over the past 20 years, to be seen to be acting decisively.
Yesterday, more disorder for the authorities to contend with, this time German fans in Lille. With Russia playing there on Wednesday and England fans using it as a base for the match against Wales in nearby Lons the following day, the trouble could be far from over. Dan Rowan, BBC News, Chantilly.
Microsoft has announced that it's buying LinkedIn, the professional social networking website, for a massive £18 billion. It's one of the biggest tech deals in history. And when the news broke, LinkedIn's share price rose by 50%. Analysts say the deal will help Microsoft boost sales of its business and email software. Here's our technology correspondent, Rory Ketlin-Jones.
It's a social network for business, linking more than 400 million people worldwide who make professional contacts, seek new jobs or recruit new staff. But now LinkedIn is being bought by Microsoft in the software company's biggest ever deal. The two partners explain why they thought this marriage would work.
When you think Microsoft, you think about professionals, knowledge work and productivity. And there is no better way to realize that mission other than connecting the world's professionals and making them more successful and productive.
The mission statements have different words, but at the end of the day, we're really trying to accomplish the same thing. Connect the world's professionals, make them more productive and successful, empower every individual and organization on the planet to achieve more.
Just a quarter of LinkedIn members, 106 million people, visit the site every month. That compares with the 1.65 billion who visit Facebook. But Microsoft is now paying the equivalent of £174 for each of them. Just for context, for the same money, it could have bought Sky TV, a business which made big profits last year when LinkedIn made a substantial loss. The company's last big move, buying Nokia's mobile phone business, went badly, with the entire value of the deal written off within a year. But Microsoft is turning into a cloud computing company, storing customers' data on its own computers and offering them all sorts of services, now including LinkedIn. The hope is that the network brings with it something very valuable.
The data about each worker or professional that's in the workplace, their contacts, who they've worked with before, who they'd like to work with in future, who they sell to and who they buy from, is extremely valuable from an enterprise perspective and for Microsoft to sell services into companies around the world.
Some LinkedIn users took to the network to express concern about the deal. They may need convincing that connecting with Microsoft is a good idea. Rory Ketlin-Jones, BBC News.
In a moment, it'll be time for the news where you are. But before we go, we'll leave you with some of the images from Orlando and around the world in the aftermath of the worst mass shooting in recent US history. Good night.